And we're off another episode of the Commercial Real Estate Podcast. We were recording here at the Ottawa Real Estate Forum. I'd like to thank, of course, First National for powering the podcast. I'm Aaron. He's Adam. Let's get going. We've got a great guest. This is actually, I think, the first CMHC guest we've ever had on the podcast.
It's exciting.
Adam and I spend a lot of our time discussing CMHC. As most of you know, I think First National is the largest CMHC lender in the country. That's something that we pride ourselves on, and spend quite a fair bit of time talking about CMHC policy. We promised Francis Cortellino, who's the economist at CMHC, that we will not ask him any questions about policy. I will say the words MLI Select once, and we're never going to reference it again. This is all about what's going on in the housing market, what's transpiring in the Ottawa region. Perhaps we'll touch on Montreal. But sorry, Adam, you're not going to get to grill him on.
I'll save it for another
Yeah,
time.
save it for somebody else. We'll put it in an email, okay? Francis, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So where do you want to go first? Let's start macro, perhaps, and really just talk about the supply and demand that's impacting the housing market generally, and then I think we will focus further and further down into sort of regional discussions and starts and what's driving it.
Yeah, so as you may know, there's a lot of demand on the market, especially on the rental side. I would say there's two main drivers for the rental demand in the last few years. The first is that population growth was unbelievable in Canada, Ottawa, Montreal, and a lot of provinces. And most of the people, international migrants, when they arrive, they're going to opt for the rental market. So when you look at data, it's 70, 80% of them, 90% in some cases that will go to the rental market. So that really fueled rental demand in the last few years. At the same time, if you look at the data, it's really difficult for first-time home buyers to buy that first condo, that first single-family home. And once again, renters' rate for first-time home buyers are higher now than what it was maybe 5-10 years ago for people the same age. So young people are more renters now than people the same age 5-10 years ago. And once again, that also is going to fuel rental demand. So that's, I would say, across the country, more or less. So a lot of rental demand. At the same time, supply, in some cases, there was a lot of rental supply coming to the market, especially in Quebec, but elsewhere in Ontario, BC, it was mostly condos being built in the last few years. And now it's changing a little bit, especially in BC, in the prairies. We got more and more rental coming to the market. Toronto as well, but Toronto is still a condo market. But rental market is expanding. So a lot of demand, supply coming to the market, but not enough supply.
Not as fast as
Not as fast, exactly. So the problem is that it's normal. High demand, low supply. You've got low vacancy rate, not a lot of options. And we've got also important rent increase in the last few years. So in a lot of regions, we're around 8-9% rent increase. So those were, I would say, record for a lot of
regions. And you know, how concerned are you, or as an economist, when you're looking at the supply and demand? I mean, everyone sat in an economics class where there's just these two lines going across, and there's an equilibrium, and that's
everything in life can fit on that.
Yeah, right. I'm crossing my hands here, so you can visualize it. And so these bars are moving. Supply is not coming on, so therefore, and demand is increasing, so the price keeps moving further to the right. But there's an income variable here. How do you digest the income variable? Because obviously it just can't keep moving because there's an affordability issue. And I'm not talking about like affordability in the sense of like, discounted pricing, like just the fact that Canadians at large at some point just can't afford rents at some level. What does that look like in your world?
Yes, that's a good question. And you're talking about demand, supply, and income growth was not enough to support that rent growth. And when you go outside those two lines of demand and supply, it's have real impact on people's lives. People they do everything to pay the rent or the monthly mortgage payments. And then they're going to cut on other expenses like could be food or travel. Often it's not even travel or stuff like that. It's only basic stuff that they need to pay. So they're going to cut on that. Often they're going to be in an apartment smaller for them. They're a big family only with one bedroom. So, and even we can talk about homelessness as well.
Well, that's it. And quality of life goes down.
Exactly.
Malnutrition, because all of a sudden you can't afford the right foods. Like it's just it has this big, huge spiraling impact on all Canadians.
Exactly. So I remember when I used to take the the subway near my home when I was going to university. I never saw, maybe once in a while, you would see once in a blue moon, homeless people in the subway. But now every morning when I take the subway, there's 2 or 3 of them. So you see there's a problem. There's a mismatch between demand and supply on the market. You can feel it. And probably people in there's financial stress because of that. And we need to find ways to increase supply on the market for sure.
The problem, of course, is you got 3-year approval processes in a lot of municipalities, and every single year you have numbers going up. People that need this housing. You mentioned immigration is a big driver. Canada's had record-setting immigration the last couple of years, but that is going to slow down. Those numbers are being dramatically reduced. Will that soften the demand for apartments, given that, as you mentioned, the trajectory for most immigrants is they come as renters, but a lot of them do ultimately end up in home ownership, freeing up units. And if there's not a fresh wave of 1 million people a year coming in behind, would that have a moderating effect on the supplies or the demand side of the equation, and follow along the rents?
Before you jump in, I've got an interesting stat that I read recently. Now, it's an American stat, but it was done by a university. So I mean, it was definitely right in for the U.S. context. It probably transcends borders. And that was for every 1% of population growth let in through migration and immigration. And I think in the U.S. its average is 4. In Canada, I don't know what the number is. Do you know what the percentage of growth is? It's 5 or 6% probably. For every 1% of migrant growth on your population, housing prices go up by 3.3%. I thought that was a really interesting correlation between migrants coming into your country and just the impact it has on housing costs.
Yeah, so I don't know the exact number for Canada, but for sure, population growth is a big driver of housing demand and then housing prices. So to go back to the question on, we all know now that they're looking at decreasing the number of maybe immigrants or non-permanent residents as well. So if I would say the demographic population growth decrease a little bit or is not as strong as before, housing demand could be a bit lower than what we used to have. But we need to remember that in 2023, it was a record level of housing demand coming from those migrants. So even if we cut back a little bit, we're still, I would say, far higher than what we had maybe 10 years ago. So it's a bit, the rental demand won't be as strong as 2023, but will remain strong. So I think that we can expect pressure on the market once again. And talking about, you were talking about municipal regulations and years of approval, and so I'm looking into what Ottawa City is doing and Montreal City is doing. So I think that a lot of municipalities now are kind of aware that there's a problem and looking for ways to have more efficiency. But I would say the problem is at the same time is that they want more supply, but at the same time they need money to finance infrastructures or other services. And one way to get more money is to put fees on new housing. So they kind of caught into more housing, but also more money. And we'll have to find ways to, I would say, improve that situation, because a big part of the new supply coming to the market is through the municipalities with the approval process. And we need to be more efficient on that point.
Couldn't agree more. And cutting out fees sounds great. We're talking, of course, about the demand side on it. CMHC would have a great purview of the supply side, given that a lot of apartment construction, of course, is financed through CMHC. Do you see that supply continuing, over the next 2 or 3 years? Going to see the same number of starts, see the apartment builders being as active? Is that the forecasting you're looking at, is continued high volumes?
Yeah, so for most of the country, we're expecting housing starts to increase over the next few quarters, because I think the main problem at the moment, there's a many problem, but one of the challenges was the high interest rates environment. So with interest rates now decreasing, probably the pro forma, the economics of doing rental structures, especially, will be a bit easier. And also there's new mortgage rules, so maybe a potential pool of buyers for new condo market could be increasing as well. So maybe a bit more supply coming to the market. So
are you referencing specifically the increase in the mortgage amount, the longer AMs, things like that? They're facilitating mortgages, those recent changes?
Yeah, for example, for first-time buyers who's looking to buy a new condo, now the mortgages can be 30 years. So we know that a problem in a lot of places in Canada and a lot of region is that the pre-sale are anemic. So there's nothing going on. So probably if there's a bit more buyers, maybe some condo project that couldn't have started because of low pre-sale could start. But as well, I think that rental will remain the main driver of the multi-res development in the next few years, because the problem with affordability is so important. People are going to stay renters longer than before. And with the lower mortgage rate, interest rate probably is going to be, I wouldn't say easier, but a bit less difficult to have pro forma that works for rental structures. And this morning at the panel here, I was talking about the Ottawa City, about MLI Select. So I'm going to bring that up.
Oh, no, you
So,
said, okay, all right.
The only thing I'm going to talk about it because I already talked about it this morning. So I look at the number last week for Ottawa City, and since 2023, for the Ottawa City alone, if you look at all the units that were approved, under construction, or completed, so construction is over under MLI Select in Ottawa, we're talking close to 9,000 rental units for Ottawa. And okay, a third of them are still in the approval process, but that's quite a few. And hopefully with lower interest rates, we can have more rental structures being built in the next few years, and maybe some also. It's possible that builders will maybe don't have to use all those different programs that were available, but we'll have to monitor that for sure.
One of the biggest challenges that developers are facing right now is just land availability. The fees you talked about, the approval timeframes. I mean, it's still really thin margins. Does any of your research, do you get into just how the government can help the developers kind of make, I mean, you said interest rates coming down. Of course, interest rates are a big driver, but there has to be other ways that the federal government, CMHC, can sort of enact policies to get these things built more rapidly.
Yeah, I would say housing is really a complex ecosystem. There's a federal government, provincial government, municipalities. You've got private firm. You've got nonprofit organizations. So it's quite complicated. So first of all, I think that everyone should try to work towards going the same direction. So often, federal governments will do something trying to help. Provincial government will try to do something trying to help. Municipalities will do something, but often maybe those different policies don't work well together. So it's like having a hockey team, and everybody wants to do their best, but they're not working together. So you need a better collaboration. That's what we have right now, I guess. So this is, I would say, the main point. And productivity as well. So I think that a builder told me a couple of months ago, he was joking, but we're building like we're building them 100 years ago. So we need to look at BIM, prefab, all those kind of stuff. But productivity is always time. Time is money. So all those approval process through different, I would say, not only municipalities, but approval program for federal partners, provincial governments, all those different levels of government need to be more efficient, municipalities as well. And once again, we need more supply on the market.
I saw a stat. It was 1967 was the peak of productivity in the construction industry.
For apartments or just for all?
For all housing starts
housing,
in Canada. And so since 1967, it's been a kind of a slow, steady decline, but it's actually at its almost worst as far as number of housing starts per person in Canada today.
That wasn't even adjusting for population growth.
No, that includes population growth.
Okay.
It's that bad, right? It's so hard for us to get out of our own way to build these things.
Yeah, and I released a report. I don't remember all the numbers exactly, but released a report a couple of weeks ago showing that if we had the same productivity that we had maybe 20 years ago in the housing industry, we've been able to add maybe 1,000 or 100,000 more units on the market. So just that productivity needs to be improved, but it's difficult. We need to look into it. It can be the different options. There's time as well, so we need to look at all those options.
Historically, housing has been a provincial matter. It's now, I think, we all think it has become a federal matter. Like, do you think that? Do you think the federal government really internalizes that, adopts that? Like, I mean, I know you work for CMHC, so you're on the federal side of it, but there still just feels like there's disconnect. Like you've mentioned it. The province is supposed to be the ones that are owning this, but the federal government is trying to get involved, but it's
GST removal.
Yeah, like it seems like it's still kind of like a hot potato. Like it's not like it's somebody's responsibility to figure it out. Do you have any comment on how you resolve that?
Yeah, to go back on, I think that every level of government have their different tools. So, and they all trying to use it to improve supply on the market. But at the same time, if everybody is using it without collaborating fully with the other level of government, I don't think that you're going to have the full potential on how many more units you could put on the market. So once again, I think that everybody wants to have more supply. Everybody is looking to increase that number of housing starts in Canada. But we need more collaboration with all levels of government. So I don't think there's there's need to be like a leader that are going to lead all the other levels of government, but we need that collaboration because there's that sense of I often say it's urgent. We need to do something that's urgent, but we really feel that
Urgency. Yeah.
We
Hello.
really
Yeah.
feel
It is, but it is urgent, isn't it? Like
Yeah.
people are leaving. People are leaving the country. People are leaving the major urban centers. Like it is starting to become like we just talked about the homelessness. Like there's so many ramifications. People living in eight family of 8 living in a 1-bedroom house. Like
yeah.
there's so much. And to your point, like we're still not building. Like I mean, it's urgent. It's been urgent for 4 or 5 years now. We've been talking about it on this podcast for 7 or 8 years. Like it's been, like we saw the tea leaves. I remember Sean Hildebrand from Urbanation and him kind of describing all of the things that were transpiring in the marketplace, and us going, "Oh my goodness, like we're not building enough."
Or Wendy Waters talking about the gap on the annual demand increase for apartments and versus supply,
and that was 7 or 8 years ago.
Like
Like
never catch up.
And I'm sure in pockets of the government this has been known. Now I think it's nationally, everybody's aware. Like no one can argue this isn't a major issue. But again, there still seems to be no major impact. Like, and you're right, CMHC and MLI Select and the way that the mortgage insurance has helped big time. Like, and we are, we're obviously in the middle of that, but it's marginal ultimately for the scope and scale of development that we need.
Yeah, so we had released a report looking at the supply gap on the market, and basically we're looking at two things. We're looking at so how many units do we need for just to be able to, I would say, absorb demographic growth and economic growth for housing demand, and also how many units should we have more just to be able to have a market that is affordable, like 20 years ago when people put more, I would say, a normal per share of their income on the monthly payment of the mortgage or rents. And if you look at the data that we released, so we know that we're going to produce some housing starts in the next 5 to 10 years, but we would need to add even more units, like 3.5 million.
Yeah, that's
on
the
top of
3.5 million units.
So that's a lot of units, and we know that it's quite impossible because of labor constraint, productivity, land. So we just wanted to send the signal that there's something wrong with how the housing market is working right now. There's something wrong, and we need to find solution. We need to find improvements, and this is why we released a report, and it's starting. So we're seeing a lot of different people trying to find solution, but once again, we need a more efficient way,
more collaboration
to improve the number of units that we release on the market every year.
Well, and government intervention has to be a large part of that. Other asset classes don't have as much regulation, subsidies, whatever, programs like MLI Select help facilitate it. And even with serious government intervention, there's still more of a gap, so more of a shortage of that particular asset type than any other out there. If you were to have the ability to wave a magic wand and just solve one of the choke points in the delivery stream, where do you think the most constraint is in terms of trying to get product out? Because you mentioned things outside of government intervention. You mentioned labor shortage, things like that. So I mean, the entire process, you could solve just one issue to have the most impact. What would it be?
A really good question on that. So there's so many, so it's hard to find one. But I believe that I was talking about collaboration. So let's say that you've got a project that involves different level of governments because there's different programs, and then the municipality needs to give the permit and everything. If somebody a builder could work in that environment with simple structure and just the process is super easy, and then maybe it takes only 1 year, a year and a half, and then you can start your project. So everything was really good on that point. I think once again, if you can save all this time, you save a lot of money, and all that money that is saved is going to have an impact on your house price or on your rents at the end of the day. So that would be probably something that would be, I would say, easy, but that people could work to improve in the next few months.
We're kindred spirits then, because that'd be my answer too. I've always thought, you can waive development charges, but that's a real cost to a city. Now they don't have that income coming in. But if you shorten a development timeline during the approval process, it doesn't really cost a municipality anything, but there's a big financial benefit to the developer. So that's an incentive that's not a big giveaway from a city that really can help out developers. So like in my mind, that's the obvious low-hanging fruit, is just cut them in half, the approval times.
Yeah, but I would say we need also bylaws. There's some regulation we need to follow. You don't want to have a strange building popping up somewhere in the city, so you need those bylaws. But at every level of governments, and often builders now are involved at the federal government with some program, the provincial same thing, municipalities for the permit and approval process. So if all that process could be easier for everyone, I think it would be everybody would win at the end of the day. The government and also the municipalities and also the more important population would win. And just going back to government intervention, I think that there's a role for government, but if you look at I would say, let's say an average price of building an apartment right now, it's maybe $300,000, $400,000. Let's say in some markets, if you look at the number of units that we need, federal government, provincial don't have that kind of money. We need also money coming from the private sector.
Of course.
So once again, you need government for some incentives, but you also need private money to build all those units that we need. So once again, we all need to work together toward that goal.
Mark Kenny of CapREIT said the exact same thing in this podcast, that obviously government intervention is a big portion of it, but just the coffers don't have the $3 trillion we need to spend over the next decade to get housing where it needs to be.
Yeah, and you've heard mayors that control sort of city coffers saying we're going to build this many units, and you start doing the math, you're like, well, that's impossible. Like, there's just, you don't have that much liquidity. How is Montreal doing with timeframes and bylaw amendments and turnaround times? Like, what's the average? Do you have a sense of just how long it takes for the permitting?
So it's a bit difficult because there's no, I would say, good data on that.
Yeah.
So
There's a lot of smaller municipalities. Is that why?
Yeah, but if you talk to builders doing projects in the greater Montreal area, they would say it's easier often in the suburbs than in the Montreal city, because Montreal city is bigger, more bylaws, more complex a little bit. So, but when you talk to builders, I would say in Toronto or Vancouver, or in doing project in Montreal, they would say it's a bit easier in Montreal than Toronto, Vancouver, especially that as well in Montreal, the development charges are not as strong or as important as in Toronto and Vancouver. So often when you're a municipality, you're better than others, but often maybe you're worse than others. So it's difficult. And we don't have clear data on that. It's mostly stories, anecdotes. So it's difficult to have a clear view on that.
I mean, Vancouver seems to be making progress, and it's still to be determined. But with some of the new, I'm trying to remember what the acronym is, but it's transit-oriented development, transit-oriented, where there's certain parameters. Yeah, I think it's called TALK, but I could be wrong. And that, I think, was a provincial government pressure onto the municipalities to make sure that they create these new bylaws.
Well, like in the Renex today, Waterloo is doing, as of right, 12 stories if you're within a certain radius of a transit hub.
And we haven't seen that, unfortunately, in where the affordability is the one of the worst, right, in Toronto. And I'm hoping in Vancouver, at least, those types of bylaw amendments are going to be impactful. And I was curious. That's why I was asking about Montreal, if we're seeing it like an affordability. Montreal's kind of a curious one because it's a renter's market, right? There's 70,000 apartment units in Montreal. I think there's like 35,000 in the rest of Canada all combined, right? Like it's so drastic. Rents down are cheaper. How would you describe affordability in Montreal versus the rest of the country?
So Montreal was maybe one of the first in Canada being developed 100, 200 years ago. So at that time, and I talked to some historian on that didn't have cars, stuff like that, so they would build dense units. So because people had to walk, so this is why we have all those small plexes in Montreal, and this is the big, I would say, rental stock. So and rental stock also compared to Toronto, Vancouver is mostly low-rise, mid-rise, not high-rise structures, and often the rental stock is a bit older. So this is why rent's also a bit less expensive in Montreal, because older stock, smaller stock, low-rise, mid-rise, less expensive. But if you look at rent growth in the last few years, it's been similar to what we have in Toronto, Vancouver. Okay. We have the same pressure. So the level of rents is lower, but the pressure on rents is getting similar. Is getting similar, and just going back to maybe those municipality and approval process, even the Montreal City is kind of aware. And I was listening to an interview made by somebody looking at working for the housing department, counselor, saying that we need that change of culture as well, because often in the urban planning department, there's bylaw and you need to comply to those bylaw, but we need to change our culture. How could the project work with those bylaw? What could be adjusted to the project so we can have more supply? And I think there's that they want to do it, but once again, probably stuff that's going to take a bit of time to change that culture. And hopefully in the next few months, few quarters, you have that change of culture, and then more project coming in. And urban planner who used to work for the Montreal City, now is a builder, saying that, I understand where they're coming from. It's difficult when you have all those bylaws to just say, no, it's not good, so change your project, but we need to tweak it a little bit, and maybe it's going to work, and we're going to have more and more units.
And that's ignoring NIMBYism and all of the community planning meetings and all the battles that go on with trying to build in somebody's backyard.
You have a national view, but your real area of expertise is Ottawa, Gatineau, Quebec City, Montreal. So we call it a few 100-kilometer radius of where we are right now. So when you're looking at those cities and the trajectories they're on over the next couple of years, which one's going to have the most relief from affordability issues, and which one's going to see the most acute affordability issues?
Good question. I probably is going to be difficult everywhere. So for sure, Montreal is less expensive than Ottawa, and even Gatineau in the rental market. So for sure that even if the rent growth is important, I would say the share of the income going to the rents is lower in Montreal, or even for house prices. So Montreal is, I would say, is a bit better there because of that. I would say all the reason I just told you a couple of minutes ago on why there's the rental market is so big. Yeah. So Ottawa, Gatineau, probably still going to be a bit difficult because home prices, but especially Ottawa.
But with high incomes though here too, they have high incomes, but even then a larger share is going towards housing.
Yeah, the problem often is that if you look only at, let's put the focus on rental market. If you look at renters, often the renters in the first quintile, so the one with the lowest income, often those renters have the same income in Ottawa and Montreal. But the rents are way more expensive in Ottawa than Montreal. So for people with the lowest income, it's more difficult living in Ontario than in Montreal or Quebec City, for example. So I would say the problem, if you look only with that matrix on the share of income of the first quintile going to the rents, it's going to be more difficult in Ottawa. And land is more expensive in Ottawa as well. So when you do development charge are more expensive for all new rental units coming to the market, will also be more expensive than Gatineau or Montreal, for example. So Ottawa is still, I would say, a challenge for affordability.
I feel like we might have been a little negative in this conversation, so we're going to wrap up, I think, after this last question. But what's the positive view? We'll leave everybody with a good feeling before we part ways today. What's a good story for affordability in this country over the next couple of years?
I would say that we're expecting housing starts to increase, so that's the first good news. And once again, I would go back to everybody's talking about the housing market. Everybody's talking about the affordability issues that we've got. So everybody's trying to find solutions. So I wouldn't say that everybody is around the table at the moment. We just need to wait to find a way that everybody talks the same language with the solution.
Are you confident that's possible?
We need to be optimistic about that. So hopefully we'll get there, and we're already, I guess, in the process of getting there. But with more time, I guess we're gonna have more and more units coming to market, and hopefully we can, I would say, not resolve completely that affordability issues we've got, but hopefully people can have, it's easier for them to rent or to buy a home in the next few years.
Well, and it needs people like you doing the research, producing the documents, the reports, the papers, to make sure that the people that have the policy, the ability to change the policy, have the right information.
Yeah, that's where we're here. So hopefully they look at that, make the great decision with the data that we provide, the analysis we provide. And once again, at the end of the day, we want every Canadian to have a home that fit their needs, with where they can put a normal share of the income on it and have money for all the other stuff that is needed in life.
I thought that was a great closing thought. Thanks so much for joining us today. That was super informative. Obviously, you've got a real unique viewpoint on the market, given you're at the epicenter of solving the housing crisis. I want to thank, of course, Informa for hosting us here today at the Ottawa Real Estate Forum, First National for powering the podcast. But again, to our guest, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.